This is the story of Alexander and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Wait, hold on. No, sorry, my bad. Actually, this is Alexander the Great. Which, yes, as he corrects me, a very different character altogether. Alright, Alexander the Great, a great fellow who has very big eyeball in this mosaic, which is also, if you're looking at this, is a very detailed mosaic, quite famous, of Alexander the Great. So, who is Alexander the Great? Where's he coming from? What does he do? All will be covered in this video. And as all good stories begin, Alexander the Great's story begins with his father. His father, Philip II. Now, Philip II was, at the time of Alexander's birth, the king of Macedon. And here, these images portray Philip as a decently attractive fellow. However, as we go on, you'll see that Philip had some serious battle wounds that affected his image. So, lots of legends surrounded the birth of Alexander the Great, of lightning striking and temples being burned down and battles being won and horses winning the Olympics, all sorts of things. Hard to separate fact from fiction. However, from his birth, Alexander had greatness thrust upon him. So, if you're sitting there wondering, well, Mr. Shea, where is this Macedon that you're talking about? Well, it's up here. If we're looking down here, where we have been studying, this is Greece, the Greek city-states, whereas up here to the north, up here is Macedon. So we have this kingdom which Philip, father of Alexander, is the king of. Now, when Alexander is growing up, he is sent to study with a tutor of Aristotle. And he is sent here to Aristotle's school. And Aristotle is part of this golden age of Greece. He is one of the great teachers of the era, one of the wisest philosophers to ever live, and looks something like this fellow right here, or this. So Aristotle is one of the greatest teachers. Alexander studies with some other extremely famous ancient people, and his education includes medicine, philosophy, religion, morality, logic, and art, studying the Iliad, which we looked at with the siege of Troy. So his education is quite extensive under Aristotle. And Alexander, for all accounts, is known as an extremely educated and well-read person. He carries books with him wherever he travels. Now, Macedon, as we haven't mentioned it before, doesn't really rise as a power up until when Philip takes power. And when it starts to rise, you see Philip starting to wage war against different places. Namely, he starts to advance southward into first northern Greece, and then into Athens, and finally the Peloponnesian Peninsula. So Macedon expands pretty quickly. If you look at the blue, this is in 431, and then very quickly it spreads out in the next 5 to 10 years. And at 16, Alexander joins his father's forces and takes over as a regent, as the ruler while his father is out fighting. While his father is out fighting, Alexander is, especially up in the north, in here you see it in yellow in Thrace, Alexander is tasked with raising armies, so he's very much involved at a young age as a teenager in raising forces and getting troops ready for battle. So after this war and taking over Greece, Philip, who you can see here now having lost an eye in war, these leaders are not simply just letting their troops fight, they are involved as well, becomes the Hegemon, which is really a powerful, essentially all-powerful ruler of the region. And it includes all of Greece except Sparta. Sparta refuses to be involved in this. And Philip becomes wildly powerful as a king, as a leader, as this hegemon. Sadly, he's stabbed to death while at a wedding, which is a bummer because weddings are generally fun unless you're being stabbed to death like Philip. He's actually stabbed to death by the head of his guards, who, as he's running away, trips over a vine and is then stabbed to death himself. So, after the unfortunate and untimely death of Philip, well, good old Alexander the Great takes charge. And after he becomes king, he starts to expand the empire of Macedonia. He goes north, he goes south, he goes into Egypt, takes over Egypt, and he defeats the Persians in Persia. Not only is he doing this, he is doing this with thousands upon thousands of men, horses, slaves, mercenaries. He has a massive amount of forces that are able to defeat the Persians. And Alexander, as being the Great, is not content with defeating the Persians here, but in fact spreads his empire all the way to India. And at one point, his empire spans all the way from, well, I guess what today would be Italy, all the way to India through Afghanistan, which is a massive feat. And he spreads all of this in about 11 years, which, if anyone has ever tried to do this, or anything in your 11 years of your life, there's certainly not a lot of time to do all of this. Thus, why often we call Alexander, having a no good rotten wait, Alexander the Great.